What is up, everybody? This is Marshall Lee of DonkeyJawProjects.com, and we're going to talk about character design. And we got myself and two other awesome creators here who have done a lot of that. So, Teresa, how you doing?
I'm doing all right, thank you.
Awesome. Where can people find you?
Well, they can find me here on YouTube, same name as in the thingy here, Teresa del Pilar, and also on Instagram if you put underscores in between the words.
Awesome. And then we also have Russ here as well, Mr. Russ, the co-host. How you doing, man?
Hi there. How are you?
Doing good, and where can people find you, sir?
Yeah, Comic Book Black Belt on YouTube. You can find me at my website, russleach.com or comicbookblackbelt.com. I'm around on Instagram, Twitter, the usual places, and just see if you can sign up for my new book in the next year, Only Death Can Save Us. You can go to any of the websites I've just suggested, and there's a link for you to sign up to my email subscription list so I can keep everybody informed of what's going on.
Awesome. Now, with character design, I don't know if I even have a process, but I came across a process that's been helping me lately. But for me, I've always had a lot of fun with character design. And I'm really like, when it comes to, designing aliens, as I've been doing recently with the Take Me to Your Leader Tuesday challenge, or, monsters or any kind of creatures or, even superheroes, things like that. When it comes down to that, I feel like I can kind of just jump in my sketchbook, play around and come up with something cool. Or a lot of times I will have an idea for a story and I'll kind of already have something in my head, and all I got to do is find a way to satisfactorily translate that onto the page. So in a lot of ways, sometimes it comes easy for me, but lately I've been creating trying to design characters for Big Wrath, the project that I'm doing with Peter Palmiotti. And I've been actually struggling a lot. And one thing I notice is I have a hard time designing like normal human beings, for one. Now, these characters aren't necessarily normal human beings. This is more like superhero type stuff. But I'm just saying that is something I've had a hard time with. I think with like normal human beings, or even just human characters in general, they don't have to be normal. Because what stories are fun that are normal anyway about just normal people, anyways? But I find with human like characters, it's more about subtlety. Like, you can't get as outlandish and crazy with the design, and I think that's why I have a harder time with that. And I'm really curious to hear you guys process and kind of maybe some different approaches you've used that have helped you in character design. Let's start with Teresa. What's helped you?
Well, for me, it's all about first of all, you think about the story. So what does the story need? And then I try to conceptualize each character with a basic shape. So, for example, in Graduation Nightmares, the protagonist, Helena, is very head in the clouds type person. So when I was designing them, I was thinking about a balloon. So she has a really big head with lots of hair and then a really thin body. So if I conceptualize with a simple shape, it always helps me. And it's always something related to who they are or their basic characteristics. So that's how I do it normally. And I focus a lot on silhouette. And that's one of the main things I do, that each character has to have a very recognizable silhouette. So if you have them at the end of a panel, people can already say that's Helena, that's the balloon, and that's Alex. She looks like a mushroom. That type of thing is what I tend to go for. And then as you draw them, they become more nuanced. But at the beginning, they're very simplistic. So it's like I have that basic idea and then iterate and keep drawing them until they grow into something a little bit more complex, because they will naturally, I think, for me. That's what I do.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've never thought of like relating my characters with like an object or whatever that kind of shows a little bit of what they're kind of like. That's really interesting. Can you give me some more examples than the balloon? I'm curious what other things you've kind of in that realm come up
Okay,
with.
so for example, the typical one would be if you have a very fiery character, then the normal thing is to make their head a little bit like flames, or to create shapes that are similar to fire or to something that you associate with that main characteristic. And if you have someone that is very absent-minded or something like that, I tend to do things that resemble air or water because they're like very fluid and like, hey, what's up? So they, tend to look like water or air. So I tend to think in elements or everyday objects. So fire is the typical one. If you look at typical manga, shonen manga, a lot of the main characters have fire-like hair. So that's a typical silhouette that they go for. Yeah, that sort of thing.
And
simple silhouettes.
how quick do you go into the silhouette process? Like, is that one of your first things you do, or do you kind of do some other
No.
things and then jump into silhouette?
That's the first drawing step. The first step would be concept. So I just come up with words that I associate with them. I expand that list of words. I think about shapes that encapsulate that idea, and then I come up with one or two words, and then I work with that. So I start with words, but that's just how I do it.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's something that I've been playing around with too. I feel like starting with words is really helpful, for sure. And does gesture does that play a big part in the character design?
Yeah. Not at the beginning, but when I'm thinking about the personality, body posture has to do a lot with the personality. So if they're really unconfident, they tend to have their shoulders like this and be slouching forward. If they're really confident, they have their shoulders back. And if they're really relaxed, they have their hands on their pockets. So I do think about gesture, but not at the beginning. At the beginning, if I can, I use these pens, the Posca pens, because they have I don't know if you have them, but they have a really thick, like, I don't know if you can see it in the camera, but the point is really thick. So it doesn't allow you to go into detail, and you have to focus on the big picture. Okay. So it's like go from abstract concept to big picture silhouette, and then, develop the rest of the details. Although I don't do very detailed characters, to be honest.
What's that?
I don't do very detailed characters anyway, so that's sort of the answer.
I think that's interesting. Like detail, like having a ton of detail makes it so much harder to draw especially like I kind of titled this, how to do character design for comic creators, because the one thing I didn't really realize going into making comics was I don't think I quite appreciated how many times you have to draw these characters in how many different positions. And when you have really detailed characters, that can get really tedious.
Yes, absolutely. Especially with hair. I tend to go really simple with the hair because hair can get really fiddly.
Interesting. All right. What about you, Russ? How do you approach character design?
Yeah. I think first off, I'll pick out a couple of things.
Teresa.
The two issues that Teresa came up with. First off, in general, you should always start with a more loose approach to whatever you do, and then dial it down, which I think is great advice. And having the silhouette is just spectacular advice that everyone should take a lot of notice of, because if you're doing a comic book, you want people to stand out, you want your characters to stand out from each other. And that whole aspect of making a silhouette of them and seeing if you can identify them, I think is probably one of the greatest pieces of advice you could give to people wanting to, or to artists, to creatives wanting to get their characters individual. So I think that's stellar advice from Teresa. I really do. The way I approach it, I would say there's two types of character. There's the stand around in a crowd character, and you can, because they're more random, you can take a more random approach to the way that you draw them. So it doesn't matter whether an alien, a human, or whatever, you can come at it quite randomly. But then there's the characters that are in a story that are specific to the story, that are your main characters. And my approach to those characters would be first off to look at them and what they need. So what does the story require them to do? What does their character require them to be? So whether they're big or small, whether this kind of powers they have, if it's a superhero, or even the kind of character that they show. So if it's a warlike character, how is that going to work if you create a small character? Yeah. So if your physical aspects to a character that is supposed to be very violent or very strong, and you decide that I'm going to make those characters physically small, then it means that you really have to beef up their non-physical characteristics by other aspects within the character design. If you say it's difficult to get across, but you don't have to have, for instance, a warlike character being huge and muscular, but you do have to convey that they are a warlike character. Yeah. So there's so many different aspects that go to it, but it's definitely about seeing what the physicality of the character requires to forward their characteristics within the book, and to also forward the story. So they've got to fit. They have to fit with the way that everything works, the way the world works, and the way the story works. And it's one of those things that I think it's definitely a slow process. It's not something it's very rare that you just come up with a character and it's right first time. You're going to need several passes at it and a pause between each pass. And to help you out while you're actually producing a comic book, which is what you were talking about repeating a character, turnarounds are huge. You must have your characters look and feel down pat from the start, with a turnaround, back, front, top, side, whatever, so that you know where the bits and pieces of their physicality, their costume, whatever it might be, are on the character, so that you can draw them from any angle. And also, even if you're drawing something bizarre, like a bizarre alien with weird tentacles or what have you, understanding the way anatomy works for a number of different processes. So human anatomy, animal anatomy, just understanding the way that works really helps you come up with something different, come up with something that when you put them in motion in your comic book, it has a presence rather than just feeling stilted and weird. Unless, of course, you're really going for stilted and weird.
Right. That's interesting. Yeah, it's so true. Like, I feel like, you know, and I'm glad you said unless you're going for something stilted and weird, because, you know, that is also an option. But you know, I think having an understanding of anatomy definitely helps, because it's actually almost like a cool trick, because it's like it helps bring kind of a believability to the character and grounds it in a recognizable reality, even though it is an outlandish character. So that's definitely helpful advice, I would say. And I also like what you said about the crowd characters. You know, it can be more random, and the decisions are less important. And I also think it's interesting what you said about kind of how they need to fit within the world of the comic book. So even crowd characters, that's probably, I would say, maybe your main concern with creating them is, you know, they can be random and the choices aren't as important, but make sure they look like they fit in the world at least.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's really interesting. I'm curious, both of your thoughts on this. Do you use reference in your process at all? I guess we'll start with Russ.
Yes, all the time. And it depends. There's obviously multiple types of reference. So you can reference movies, other books, science fiction, you know, literature, all kinds of things, and historical reference as well. So if you were looking to do a character that had, I don't know, off the top of my head, say Celtic overtones, you'd go back and look at historical Celtic art and clothing and that kind of thing. So that there's that kind of reference, and then there's, as I alluded to, physical reference. So if I'm drawing physically something that resembles a human, I want to make sure that I know human anatomy. If I'm going to draw something that has, I don't know the term for it, but where you have say the leg of a horse at the back legs, where the knee goes the wrong way, so it's got an extended ankle. So a hind leg, if you're going to look at that, then go and look at animals that have those kind of legs and check out the way that they move. If you're going to draw something with tentacles, go and check out an octopus. And so, yeah, reference is big, I think, because it helps you create something that's, we don't want to talk about realistic because these are comics. And, you know, but what you want to do is create something that's believable, or at least doesn't break the world. It doesn't break the experience you're having in the comic. That's the aim, I believe. So.
What about you, Teresa? What role does reference play in your character design?
I would subscribe to what Russ said. Like but I don't use it a lot at the beginning, especially I don't look at reference because I try to focus on the story. And if I go to look at reference, I sort of get it contaminated with the reference. So at the beginning, I just focus on the story and concept and then get the silhouette. And once I have that, then I start looking at things such as what Russ was saying, things such as anatomy or detail about Celtic tattoos or something like that. If I want to get something like that accurately, I look at reference. And sometimes when I'm really struggling with the concept, what I do is I look up people that have that vibe that I'm looking for. So for example, there's one character that I'm actually drawing right now that I wanted to give the vibe of like Britpop 90s singer. So I looked at a lot of references for that, and I got the general idea of like the hair and the clothes. And then I stopped looking at that for a couple of weeks, and then I drew what I remembered. Because I find that if I look at the reference in the concept stage, it gets very contaminated with the reference, and then I don't come up with something that actually services the story.
Interesting. So, you know, going with this kind of idea of specifically creating character design for comics, one thing I've heard a lot of creators say, and something that I've done for sure, which I don't know, you know, I think a lot of people would maybe kind of think this isn't a good approach and stuff, and I get why. But when you're creating comics, sometimes we create characters on the fly. Sometimes we create them right on the page. I think it probably is better if you don't, but the nature of comics, depending on if you're working on a deadline or not. I mean, I think of these production creators, you know, who are like traditional in the traditional process of making comics. Everything's got to go quick, and you have to get these pages out, you know, try to get one out a day or whatever. And, you know, you don't necessarily have time when you're doing a 24-page comic in a month, you know, to create every character, you know, how make a turnaround for every character. And obviously, you know, you probably, if you're hired by Marvel or DC or something, you have a certain character design already set up. But there's also other characters that sometimes you might bring in and stuff. Do you ever, or have you ever created on the fly like that? I know I have, but I'm sure a lot of people haven't.
No, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I have definitely done it on the fly because, you know, sometimes if it's your webcomic and this character doesn't have a very important role, why wouldn't you do it on the fly? It's like a guy with a mustache and, you know, shaved head. The end.
Yeah. It's definitely something I had to do a lot for Doctor Who. Is produce crowd scenes or multiple areas where you had a diverse set of characters. Somebody asked in the chat if we could show something. So I have something if they want to see it.
Yeah.
Page 6. So here, for instance, we've got a crowd scene and two. Can you see that?
Hold on. There we go.
Yeah. So I've got a crowd scene here behind the Doctor and another character that was just it was part of the story, but was again completely original. And then these characters, which were literally in it for a couple of pages, and then you see the alien crowd behind, and then an alien crowd and a cat creature. And then I think I can move that onwards. Then again, the alien crowd in the background, trying to make everyone individual. And then these guys in their car, and that was pretty much it. That was one. And then share screen on this one. If you can see that again.
Yep.
Can you see that?
Yep, it's on.
Yep. Okay. For instance, this was slightly easier actually, but it was a market scene with at least some of the aliens were like, so there were several races, so it wasn't quite as difficult. But again, you kind of had to come up with a look so that they didn't all look human. So it is the kind of thing that you do quite a bit, like you say, when you're under pressure to get a page done, and somebody says, "Oh, there's a crowd scene and it's in an alien market."
Yeah.
No, oh, these are the aliens. These are what they look like. This is the mix. This is the kind of market. I mean, the most I got was it's kind of like a Moroccan market, and there's some aliens in it, and that was as close as I got. So you do have to do that on the fly. You can't sit there and say, "Oh, I'm just going to sketch out a turnaround for all these characters." Invariably, what happens there is you get a little bit of humanization happen, and they are in general sort of bipedal, because they're, obviously that's what you're used to drawing. So you throw in something weird and try and make it look a little bit different. But yeah, it does happen. You're right. It happens all the time. And as comic book artists, rather than as concept artists, you have to get on with it. You've got a deadline. There it is. Get the page done. So it does happen.
Gotcha. So we definitely have some questions in the chat. Thanks everybody for hanging out in the chat and being a part of this. You guys are awesome. And so we have from Noob Comic Guy Official, do you have any tips on character consistency with features, etc.? Is it just repetition? How about you, Teresa? What do you think?
I'm not the best with character consistency because I do cartooning, so a lot of it is stretched and squashed, and it's not like comic book stuff, which has to be quite precise. So I give myself a lot of leeway in that sense. But going back to the design thing, if you design them with an idea in mind, especially a silhouette, as something that is definitely there and has to be there in order for them to be them, then repeating that all the time. So like if their characteristic is that they have sleepy eyes, you cannot avoid that, even if in an expression of surprise. You cannot open their eyes wide. So that's what I think about when it comes to consistency, not changing their body type, not changing their main features, etc. But when you're doing expression cartooning, it goes everywhere.
Gotcha. What about you, Russ? How do you keep your characters consistent? I like your response. You just laugh.
It really is. I mean, it's the same boring answer. It's practice. Yeah. You just have to keep drawing panels, pushing. The way to make interesting panels in comic books and to keep your characters consistent is by pushing your abilities constantly. Because every time you draw a crowd scene, I saw somebody say, "Oh, crowd scenes, they freak me out." Yeah, they freak me out as well, because I'm thinking, "Oh, how am I going to fill this panel?" They do freak everyone out. It doesn't matter how much experience you've got, but you just have to keep drawing them. You keep pushing yourself don't think, oh, do you know what? I'm just going to drop that out because it's easier if I don't do it. If you've got the time and it's going to help the panel, draw it.
Yeah.
You know, it's. I started again drawing comics full time 10 years ago, and being able to draw all the time has made a huge difference to my my skill level. It really has increased it. I mean, I cringe at the art that I did a while ago. I know we all do, but I can really see the improvement simply because I'm doing it every day, and I'm doing it, you know, for a particular purpose, and being able to draw people in different positions is the starting point, you know, like, and also angles and stuff, and it keeps your panels interesting and fresh, and it really is just a numbers game. The more you do it, the better you're going to get at it, and you know, anatomy is key. It's king.
Yeah, I agree with you. And also, I forgot to say that I do have basic shapes for everything. So, like, every character's head has a shape, and I know what shape it is. If it's an oval or if it's I know exactly what all looks like in the structure. If I were to build them as wired structures, I would know what that is. And that's the basis of my consistency.
Absolutely brilliant advice there, because it doesn't matter whether they're simple characters or more complex characters, they're all going to have a three-dimensionality to them. So you need to know what angles you're going to be able to draw those shapes from. This book, buy this book. Okay, it will help you if that's what if you want to draw comics, this book will help you do it. And that's not a plug for me, because I do something completely different. This is original. John Buscema is the man. Okay, buy that book. There are other books that you can buy. This is, you know, I'm not just forcing that one down your neck. There are great books out there, but do look at books like that, because they do talk. I mean, the thing that's really pertinent to what we're talking about right now, if I could just flick to it. Here we go. Look at these. If you can see this, it's a bit difficult, but there you go. Look at all the three-dimensional shapes. Yeah.
Right.
And that is exactly what Teresa was talking about. It doesn't matter how simple or how complex your characters are, you can break them down into three-dimensional shapes, put them in different positions, and then apply the detail over the top. And practice. Keep doing it.
Awesome. Yeah. And if you happen to be in an area where you have the store called Five Below, I think they have the How to Draw the Comics the Marvel Way for $5 there. So
bargain. Buy two.
Good. Yeah, exactly. So let's see. Unfortunately, I would love you guys in the chat are really like coming up with some really cool things to talk about. But I do have to get going. I have to get to work. But I do think we got into a lot of different tips, and I definitely came away with some pretty interesting things that I think are going to help me. And I hope the same has happened for you guys. Once again, Russ, let everybody know where they can find you.
You can find me at Comic Book Black Belt on YouTube. I'm on Twitter and Instagram. I'm on Facebook. Come find me. I'm at russleach.com, comicbookblackbelt.com, and also onlydeathcansavus.com. That's my new book coming out next year. And you can sign up for the email list there.
Awesome. And Teresa, where can people find you?
Teresa del Pilar here on YouTube, and on Instagram it's the same name but with underscores between the words.
Awesome. Sweet. Well, thank you guys once again for coming on the show and helping me make this a cool show. And thank you everybody for hanging out in the chat and watching on the replay as well. Feel free to please like, comment, subscribe. Let us know what you think about character design. And you know where to find me, donkeyjawprojects.com, Marsh Comics on Instagram, where else? Instagram, Twitter. Is it Marshall? I forget. It used to be Marshally_DJP. I think I changed it to Marsh Comics. My brain's been fried. I've been working crazy hours lately. But you can find me. You'll find me. There's links in the thing.
And the Discord as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So other than that, you guys all rock, and we'll talk to you in the next one. All right. See
Bye-bye.
you later.
Bye.